All right, so we had a look at what we considered first line of defense and second line of defense. And we're going to put that under one category. All right, so what we've talked about with first and second line defense, it's all under the one category we call innate immunity. Okay, so what we talked about was innate immunity, which is going to be totally different than what we look at when we talk about adaptive immunity. Okay, so adaptive immunity is different than innate immunity. Okay, adaptive immunity has a feature of what we call specificity. Okay, to it. All right, there's a specificity to it. All right, with innate immunity, what I failed to mention was that no matter what, if there was something like, if I give an example of an invader coming into this room here, and let's say the room is your body. An invader that comes in, those white blood cells that might be in this room, just attack that invader. It doesn't matter what specific phenotypic traits that particular invader has. Doesn't matter what specific things are, doesn't matter what his ear looks like or his eyes, what color eyes he has, or what color hair or he or she has. It just attacks it because it says it's foreign. Right? That's innate immunity. First and second line defense. Adaptive immunity actually takes into account that invader's hair color and nose and type of nose and ear. So there's some specific feature that this particular white blood cell will try to look for and say, oh, that particular invader, I'm going to get that invader. I'm going to get that invader every single time now because it has that specific feature that I'm looking for. All right, and so that's adaptive immunity. Okay, that's adaptive. And what we're going to find out is how devastating and how incredible your adaptive immunity is. And it turns out to be the best immunity. Okay? And so our players in this process are going to be considered our lymphocytes. All right? It's our B and T lymphocytes. All right, so that's our B lymphocytes and our T lymphocytes. Okay? Our B and T lymphocytes all come from the same place where all the other white blood cells come from. And that's going to be from the bone marrow. So let's not forget that. Okay? Don't forget that all of our white blood cells, all of them come from bone marrow, red bone marrow. Right? And that's why we call that particular organ a primary lymphatic organ. Okay? Not only because of that, but also because of in adaptive immunity, that's where one of these cells called B lymphocytes mature. Right, so let's go through slightly what maturation means. When the particular B or T lymphocyte matures, let me tell you, because that whole specific look at something gets these cells involved and then they do some great attacking, and it's the best type of attack, our body has to make sure that these guys don't attack our own cells, okay? Because what we have on our cells are these actual phenotypic traits as well that are actually called antigens. Right? What are antigens? They are actual substances on membranes of cells, parts that actually elicit an immune response. And what is that immune response? White blood cells attacking. So we don't want B or T lymphocytes to attack our own cells because our own cells have antigens. But see, we call those self-antigens. Okay, so you might remember that talk as it related to when I talked about ABO compatibility, right? But the only difference is that with ABO compatibility, we talked about how red blood cells had antigens, self-antigens. Well, we call self-antigens typically MHC1 complexes. Right, so every cell in your body that has a nucleus, all right, has an MHC1 complex. It's a self-antigen, if you will. It does have the possibility of eliciting an immune response. But what our B lymphocyte goes through in the red bone marrow is that there's this test it goes through. It's a really, really difficult test, too, where the actual bone marrow puts all of these different cells in front of a B lymphocyte and says, here, look at this MHC1. Are you going to attack it? It tests the B lymphocyte. It says, here's a liver cell. Here, let me put it right in front of you. Are you going to attack it? Here's a lung cell. Here's that MHC1 on there. Are you going to attack it? And the actual B lymphocyte has to make a decision. It says, yes, I will attack it, right? Or it says, I'm not going to attack it. And if he says, I will attack it, that would be that B lymphocyte going out into your circulatory system and attacking your own cells, right? And that's going to kill you. So what that result of the test is, if that B lymphocyte says, I will attack that MHC1, is that it's going to be programmed to cell death. And that's actually called apoptosis. Right? But the B lymphocytes that do not attack MHC1, they make it out into the circulatory system. And now they can do a job for us. Right? So that's a test. Right? It's a grueling test because if you lose, you don't just get a bad grade. Right? You actually die. And that's what's interesting. And so, but what is that process when a B lymphocyte actually does pass the test? And now it will not attack our own self-antigens, which are MHC1 complexes. We call that maturation. And so we say that that B lymphocyte has what? Matured now. All right, so that means now, and that's why the red bone marrow is a primary lymphatic organ. It's a place where certain lymphocytes mature. And in this particular case with red bone marrow, that's what B lymphocytes mature. Now that same process occurs for T lymphocytes, but it's not at the red bone marrow. He makes it out of the red bone marrow and gets to what we call the thymus, right there anterior to the heart. And so now he goes through that same process, putting all these different, that thymus puts a whole bunch of different cells in front of that T lymphocyte, says, hey, are you going to attack this MHC1 that's a part of our body? And if T lymphocytes say, no, I'm not, they make it out into the circulatory system. Now they're considered mature. So the thymus is the place where T lymphocytes mature. Okay? The red bone marrow is where B lymphocytes mature. And that's great. And now we know our B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes are most devastating and most important, if you will, white blood cells for our immunity. Okay, will not attack our own cells. Right? That's what maturation means. Right? As it relates to our immunity. All right, so that's very important. We have those primary lymphatic organs that do that test. Our red bone marrow and our thymus. Right, but we do have secondary lymphatic organs where your actual B and T lymphocytes reside. Right? And one of those secondary lymphatic organs is called lymph nodes, and we talked about that before. We see where they are. They're part of the lymphatic system. Right? And then these rest areas along that highway of what we call the lymphatic system. That's where they reside. Right? So they are secondary lymphatic organs. Lymph nodes, as well as your tonsils and your spleen. That's the largest, if you will, secondary lymphatic organ. Right? Where what? B and T lymphocytes reside. Right? Another characteristic related to B versus T lymphocytes is that B lymphocytes are what we call involved with humoral immunity. And that means fluid. Right? And it's because of what it secretes, which I'll get back to later, which is called antibodies. He attacks these invaders in that blood, right? Which these substances go through blood to find invaders called antibodies, and then they end up in tissues as well, right? So fluid in tissue, fluid in blood. So humoral immunity is how our B lymphocytes do their attacking. T lymphocytes go right up to cells. Right? They actually attack cells, our own cells, right? Cells that are infected with what? Viruses. Right? So therefore, we call that cell-mediated. They go right to the cell. Right? They're not dealing with just going in fluid and attacking something that's in the fluid or fluid in tissues. They actually go right up to cells. So that's the difference between B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. B lymphocytes are what we consider the participants in humoral immunity, versus T lymphocytes are involved with cell-mediated immunity, okay? And again, I just basically pointed out what they attack. So B lymphocytes pretty much attack those things that would be in the fluid, or in blood, in tissues, the fluid in tissues. Bacteria. All right, so B lymphocytes mostly attack our bacteria, all right, which we consider exogenous antigens, all right, outside of cells, right? Versus our T lymphocytes are going to attack cells that are infected with what virus? Don't forget, viruses go inside cells, take them over, and now those cells are weird now. They don't function right. All right, so our T lymphocytes attack them, all right? And then we call those antigens what? Endogenous antigens. Okay, so our B lymphocytes are going to attack our enemies with what we call antibodies, and our T lymphocytes are going to attack by secreting substances called granzyme B and perforin that I'm about to talk about, right? And so when we're looking at how they do their situation, let's just look at a lymph node, all right? And we'll just say exactly what's happening there so we'll get the gist of what's going on, right? So at a lymph node, okay, we're going to actually have participants involved, which are called antigen-presenting cells. What did our macrophage or our dendritic cell do? It was at a tissue, and it ate the actual organism, right? And now what it's going to do is eat it, and now what's going to come out, it's going to come out just like us. If we eat material, it goes through our body, and then it comes out, right? The disgusting thing that these antigen-presenting cells do is that what you would consider waste, when it comes out, then they put it on their membrane. They put it on their body. That's like somebody actually taking their actual waste and putting it on their body and presenting it and saying, look what I ate. You know, that's what they do. And that's good because what happens is that now that antigen is presented to everyone. Right? That's why we call these antigen-presenting cells. So who are your antigen-presenting cells? Macrophages, like we talked about, the actual player that would see something. And these actual cells that are like macrophages that are called dendritic cells, right? They actually come out of the tissue, make their way into the lymphatic system. It may take a couple of days, but then they eventually make it to a lymph node, right? And what do? They present this actual antigen now, right, to these different participants that are in the lymph node. In this particular case, let's say if it was a bacteria, we know that ultimately who's going to attack that is a B lymphocyte. And that's what happens. We're going to have a macrophage present the actual antigen, right? And then who's going to see it is actually going to be a CD4 T lymphocyte. That CD4 T lymphocyte, okay, is now going to be activated after it sees that antigen, okay? Once this CD4 T lymphocyte becomes activated, he becomes in this process like a general in the military. Now, does the general go right up to an actual enemy and attack them? No. The general gives commands. So what our CD4 T lymphocyte is a general. And when he becomes activated, he's going to give commands, all right, just like a general. And now we call him a helper T lymphocyte. Right, so that's our understanding of what we call a CD4 T lymphocyte, and eventually what they become, when they become activated, they become helper T lymphocytes. Right? And what do? As the general, send a command to that cell who's going to deal with this enemy. Right? And in this particular case, it's going to be a B lymphocyte. And a lot of times I look at the B lymphocyte like in the military, like a sniper. Because what he does is once he becomes the actual cell that can attack this enemy, which is called a plasma cell, he secretes that particular substance called antibodies, just like a sniper shoots bullets out of his gun, right? It's going to be secreted from the actual cell and go into the blood. So remember I talked about humoral immunity? Goes into the fluid of blood, goes into the fluid of tissues. And as soon as those antibodies hit that enemy, which in this case would be a bacteria, right? Then it actually blows the bacteria up, you know. So it's an incredible way of killing the actual enemy, right? What I do want to keep in mind, though, is that what's also happening at this lymph node is not only is mitosis occurring to make what we call plasma cells, which do the destruction in making antibodies, they actually do mitosis to make what we call memory cells. And they don't do anything, but what's great about them is that they're actually going to have a memory. And don't forget what we talked about, specifically when we talked about adaptive immunity. there is this specific antigen that this B lymphocyte notices and says, I'm going to attack that specific microbe. I'm going to target that specific enemy. All right? And because it has that specific antigen. And now we have cells that are going to be actually made like through mitosis so that you make an army of them that have a memory of that particular antigen. All right, so what do we call those cells that he makes? Memory cells. They don't actually secrete antibodies. But what they do is they stay in your body, right? And this is what's different. Usually white blood cells, they only last for like 7 to 10 days. But memory cells last for years. All right, so what's great about this process, what we call adaptive immunity, is this process of memory cells development. Of what? A memory of that specific antigen. Of that specific antigen. All right, and so basically what's going to happen is that the second time that that enemy comes in to your body, then these memory cells are going to turn directly into plasma cells. But now what's the difference is that you don't just have a few plasma cells, because don't forget, as soon as these B lymphocytes turn into plasma cells, in a short amount of time, you're only going to have a certain amount of plasma cells. Right? So your system's still kind of overwhelmed with all of that actual bacteria. So, but when you have that bacteria come in a second time, then you're going to have an army ready to turn into plasma cells just like that. And now these plasma cells just take out that enemy like it's nothing, right? And that, guys, what I just described was called a vaccination. All right, so that's what you're doing when we vaccinate you. Okay, we're basically putting an antigen in. So these antigen-presenting cells can present it to these what? CD4 lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, which become helper T cells. And then what they do is they make these B lymphocytes do mitosis to turn into not only the plasma cells at that time, but what? Memory cells. And we don't even care about those plasma cells at that time, because that antigen that we put in will not cause you disease. Only thing we really wanted in that vaccine was to develop memory cells. Because now, in your body, what you have is this army of cells that as soon as they see that antigen again, not when we implemented it this time you actually got it in your body because you really had an infection occur. When that happens, these memory cells are going to directly turn into plasma cells immediately. And now you have an army of them, and you're not even going to know you were infected. That's the beauty of vaccinations, okay? And that is why adaptive immunity is the best. All right, it's because of this development of these memory cells. All right, very good.